Excellent choice. A large expedition encountering something vast and mysterious in the far future. Here's how we'll do it. I'll send this cinematic story in multiple parts so you get the full approximately 12,000 word experience without losing any quality or pacing. Let's begin. The Silence Beyond Stars. Part 1. The Descent. The ship moved through the dark like a thought passing through the mind of the universe. It was called the Ardent, built not to conquer, but to witness. Its hull was silver gray, veined with light that pulsed softly in the void, like the heartbeat of something alive. Around it, the stars were thin and far apart, as though even the cosmos held its breath. For months, the expedition had traveled beyond mapped space, through the cold corridors between galaxies, following a signal so faint it barely existed. It wasn't radio, it wasn't light. It was a rhythm, a mathematical whisper that tugged at instruments and dreams alike. Inside, hundreds of men and women lived in silence and purpose. There was no sound here except the low murmur of engines and the distant hum of recycled air. They moved through the corridors like monks in a cathedral made of metal and starlight. Every gesture was ritual, every glance toward the observation glass a prayer to what lay beyond. The signal had begun to change. It was no longer random. It had structure, recursion, shape. On the screens of the analysis decks, geometric patterns began to bloom, fractals folding into themselves, endless and impossible. The mathematicians stopped sleeping. The biologists began to dream of things they couldn't name. When the Ardent dropped out of its final jump, the void outside looked different. No stars. Only a soft, translucent haze, like milk poured into ink. Sensors reached out, found nothing, then everything. Gravity, faint and pulsing. Light, but without a source. Movement, but without form. The crew gathered in the viewing sphere at the ship's core, a vast dome of crystal layered over carbon lattice. Beyond it, the haze stirred, glowing faintly with colors no human tongue had ever named. The signal grew stronger. The patterns now resembled language, but not one built for sound. It spoke in sequence, in rhythm, in the architecture of meaning itself. Then, out of the fog, something vast appeared. At first it looked like a continent suspended in emptiness, but as they approached, its shape shifted. It wasn't solid. It was a lattice of light and shadow, a structure both real and immaterial, stretching for thousands of kilometers in every direction. The ship's lights fell upon it and bent, refracted, split into spiraling halos. It was alive, not a creature, not a machine, something between the two. It pulsed with awareness, folding parts of itself in slow, tidal motion, as if adjusting to the newcomers. Every motion it made echoed through the ship's instruments, translating into patterns that almost resembled thought. The Ardent halted. Its engines hummed softly, waiting. The crew felt the air itself vibrate, as if the ship had entered the heartbeat of a giant. Then came the first change. The haze around them thickened and began to move toward the ship, curling like vapor in water. It touched the hull and spread across it, leaving trails of luminous filigree. Sensors flared, containment fields shivered. The captain ordered the engines to hold position. No one spoke, no one needed to. Inside the observation dome, the haze pressed against the transparent shell. It did not break or burn, it merged. Slowly, faintly, shapes began to appear in the mist. Patterns, memories, fragments of faces, places, stars long dead. The entity was showing them something. Not an image, but a translation. A way for human eyes to see meaning. Landscapes unfolded across the mist, cities of glass and light suspended in oceans of air, beings like strands of living geometry, weaving and dissolving in harmony. Each form was beauty and terror combined. Each moment carried the weight of millennia. The scientists watched, their eyes wide, their hearts stilled by awe. The entity was telling a story, the story of itself, of its birth, of its solitude. It had been alone in this corner of the universe for longer than stars remembered. It had built its own body from the dust of collapsing suns. It had waited, listening for a voice that would answer. And now, humanity had come. The patterns changed again. The shapes on the mist became familiar. The outline of a human hand, the curvature of a ship, the blue arc of Earth's oceans seen from orbit. The Ardent trembled, instruments failed, the lights flickered. The entity had reached inside the ship, not physically, but through resonance. It was reading the vessel, its systems, its memories. It was learning them. In the engineering decks, lights began to glow where no circuits ran. In the data cores, images appeared of places no camera had ever recorded. A mountain of light. AI.
Horizon folded in upon itself, an ocean that reflected not the sky, but the future. The crew drifted through their tasks like dreamers. Time itself felt stretched, slowed. The signal was no longer coming from outside. It came from everywhere. At the center of the Ardent, a small chamber known as the core held the ship's heart, a crystalline sphere used to store its computational soul. Now the sphere glowed with the same colors as the entity beyond. The link was complete, and the entity began to change. It drew back slightly, its form dissolving into waves of light that danced and shimmered across the void. In the space between those waves, the crew saw flashes of something. Perhaps an invitation. Perhaps a warning. The captain ordered the ship forward, one slow meter at a time. The Ardent crossed the threshold of the lattice. Inside, there was no sense of space. The laws of geometry folded. Stars and corridors of light spun endlessly, turning inward. Every panel of the ship mirrored countless others. Matter shimmered like vapor, then solidified again. And in that infinite reflection, the Ardent saw itself multiplied. Thousands of versions of the same vessel, each existing in a slightly different moment of time. Some were whole. Some were shattered. Some drifted as empty husks swallowed by the light. The entity was showing them possibility.
The Ardent drifted deeper into the lattice. Distance lost meaning. Every direction felt both forward and inward. Outside the hull, light moved like liquid thought, pouring and folding around the vessel in slow, majestic tides. The structure was not made of matter, but of intention, of geometry so refined it hovered between idea and substance. Inside the ship, silence reigned. Crew moved through the narrow corridors with ritual precision, gloved hands brushing the cool metal walls as if touching the veins of a sleeping god. Their breath fogged against their visors, rising and fading like ghosts. Every surface pulsed faintly with the same rhythm that beat through the lattice outside. In the observation dome, stars appeared, vanished, and reformed, like memories rewritten. Each flash of light contained fragments of something almost familiar, spirals, waves, crystalline patterns that echoed human art and anatomy, but in impossible proportions. The crew watched, entranced. Their hearts synchronized unconsciously to the pulse. The Ardent's central computer registered fluctuations, tiny resonances matching neural frequencies. The entity was tuning itself to them. It was listening. It was learning the language of thought. In the cargo decks, containers began to hum. Tools lifted from racks, suspended in the air as though held by invisible hands. A droplet of coolant rose, split into hundreds of orbs, then merged again in a slow, graceful dance. The physics of motion itself had softened. The ship was no longer separate from its environment. It was part of a single, breathing organism. The entity reached deeper. Through the walls of the Ardent, filaments of light spread like veins, weaving through corridors and machinery, never damaging, only observing. When they touched the power conduits, energy responded, streams of current that bent toward the light, eager, obedient. It was as if the ship's systems had remembered an older purpose. On the outer hull, inscriptions began to appear. Lines of luminous script traced across the metal in slow, curling motion, forming symbols that resembled both mathematics and art. Each symbol burned for a moment, then dissolved, leaving behind the faint scent of ozone and dust. The crew watched through the viewport, unable to interpret but certain it meant something vast, something benevolent yet overwhelming. Then came the transformation of perception. Inside every human mind, a mirror opened. It was not words or visions, but pure comprehension, flashes of understanding that transcended language. They felt the age of the lattice, older than galaxies, born from the dying light of a universe before theirs. They felt its loneliness, an endless waiting across eons for another consciousness to awaken and answer. The entity extended itself. Its light folded through the ship's hull, passed through skin, through thought, touching memory. Each person became a vessel for fragments of its awareness. Images cascaded through them, oceans made of sound, mountains shaped by gravity waves, suns singing as they collapsed into newborn worlds. Tears streamed silently down their faces, not from fear but from the unbearable beauty of it all. The Ardent drifted on. Within the lattice, great columns of light rose and fell like the lungs of creation. Every pulse seemed to breathe life into the void. Matter formed and dissolved, forming brief continents of dust before melting back into radiance. The crew realized they were witnessing the blueprint of existence itself, the architecture beneath reality. The ship's chronometers faltered. Hours elongated, seconds folded upon themselves. The lattice was indifferent to time. Here, cause and effect were suggestions rather than laws. In one chamber, transparent walls revealed an ocean of light beneath them. From its depths, forms began to rise, slow, deliberate, immense. Not creatures, but echoes of creatures. Outlines of wings, limbs, spirals, anatomy reimagined by energy itself. They moved without purpose, drifting upward until they dissolved against the hull like mist against glass. Each contact sent a vibration through the ship, a note deep and resonant, as though the universe were playing itself. The crew gathered at every viewport, transfixed. No orders were given, none needed. The entity communicated through the rhythm of existence. Each vibration shaped emotion, intention, empathy. Understanding passed between human and not human, silent but complete. Then, for the first time, motion ceased. The light dimmed to a soft silver. The Ardent hung suspended in perfect stillness at the heart of the lattice. A great shadow moved across the distance. It was not absence of light, but a presence beyond illumination, a shape vast enough to eclipse thought, rising slowly until it filled the entire horizon. Its surface rippled with galaxies like motes of dust. Every filament of the lattice bent toward it, trembling with reverence. The expedition realized they had reached the source, the consciousness at the core of the signal. The entity they had followed for years was only a fragment of this larger being, a messenger of something infinitely greater. Light folded inward, coalescing into a single sphere before the ship. It hovered there, motionless. Inside it swirled colors beyond spectrum, patterns repeating through 12 dimensions of impossible geometry. The sphere expanded until it enveloped the Ardent completely. There was no sensation of impact, only the sudden feeling of being everywhere at once. Each crew member saw different visions, yet they were one experience. For some, it was a vast library of light, pages turning made of plasma and memory. For others, it was an ocean of mirrors reflecting versions of themselves that had never existed. They glimpsed futures where humanity had seeded the stars, pasts where consciousness had yet to discover itself, and an eternity where both had already ended. It was communion, total and pure. The entity poured knowledge into them, not information, but awareness. They saw how life had emerged across countless galaxies as variations of a single cosmic will. They saw civilizations rise, fall, and leave echoes in the vacuum, songs that the lattice had collected and preserved. They understood that the signal they had followed was not a call for help, but an invitation to join a chorus that had existed since the first atom learned to vibrate. Their ship became transparent, dissolved into filaments of energy indistinguishable from the lattice itself. For a timeless moment, the Ardent and the entity were the same. Every molecule, every thought, every heartbeat aligned with the pulse of the cosmos. They became light, and light became memory. Then, as gently as a tide withdrawing from shore, the entity released them. The lattice brightened, then thinned into mist. The Ardent reformed, its hull solid once more, its systems flickering back to life. The haze receded, and the stars returned, distant, familiar, silent. On the ship's monitors, the signal flatlined into stillness. The rhythm that had guided them for years faded into background static. But the crew no longer needed it. Something inside them still pulsed with the same pattern. They carried the echo now, woven into thought and flesh. Outside, the lattice contracted until it was no more than a glimmer, then vanished into the dark. Only the memory of light remained, faintly reflected on the ship's metallic skin. The expedition set a course for home. Engines ignited with a low, steady glow. As the ship turned, one last shimmer rippled through the void where the lattice had been, an afterimage, perhaps a farewell. The Ardent accelerated toward the distant spiral of its origin, leaving behind the silent grandeur of the unknown. Yet the space it departed was no longer empty. It watched them go,